There are other different types of dementia, and depending upon where the difficulties lie, that in the illness determines the course of treatment.
You can. All you have to do is want to do it.
Yes.
Want to be it.
When you set your mind to it, and this is who you are, and
the grown men. We have the youth that we need to mentor, and we need to inspire, and we need to motivate. But I know, as a recent conversation between you and I, that you're also in the business of motivating grown men. Through that, I'm supposed to see God in it at every turn. So me going to the Sea of Galilee was to remind me of that, to refresh myself of that. It is all under control, that He does have it. It's just as clear as that fresh water that I saw.
You're Our Unity, hosted by LeShawn Walker, Tuesday nights, 6 p.m. EST.
Welcome, everyone, to Your Our Unity, a show that wishes to spread a spirit of peace and love in the world, one person at a time. We want to encourage you to uncover the strengths and the richness of your heritage so that you can stand strong and proud in it, in all of your greatness. I am your host, LeShawn Walker. I'd like to welcome you in. Please like, share, and follow. Let everyone know that we're on right now. We have a little technical issue. We're not on Facebook, but please watch us on YouTube. We're streaming there as well as Twitch. And I also believe Twitter. I hope you guys had a wonderful week and great weekend. It's a little cold outside, I will admit, but it's feeling good here in the studio. I've had such a great day. I took the day off and I just kind of relaxed and prepared myself for this amazing interview that we're about to have with this fabulous woman, Tamara Lanier. Again, hope you guys had a wonderful weekend. I was partying for the last few days. I celebrated my pastor's graduation, I call it. She's no longer pastoring at our church, Reverend Casey Jones, but she has such great things in store for her. So we had a gala for her on Thursday. It was so great. I do not have any pictures. Unfortunately, I didn't take any, but it was beautiful. Everyone came out and we loved on her. We spent some time just speaking just such good, powerful reinforcement and aspirations into her. She's an amazing woman. She's done so much for the community, so much for the church, and so much more for everyone that is in her company. So I wish her the very best in her future endeavors and all that she's about to do. And then the next day, I celebrated a birthday of a young man that I've known for over 22, 23 years. I haven't seen him in well over 10 or 15. And he looks amazing. My girlfriend from Maryland came up and we went and we celebrated with Chris and his family, again, who I haven't seen in quite some time, but everyone looked amazing. We had a great time just getting to catch up and find out what's going on in each other's life. And it was really great. And I enjoyed every minute of it. Again, partying, having fun, dancing, enjoying the people in my life. Today is also a special day in my life. It is what I call, or who I call, my godson nephew, my best friend's son, Jace. Today is his birthday. Oh my God, this young man is getting so big. The last time I saw him, he is shot up. He's probably like 6 feet tall now. He's just growing so great, so well. He's becoming just a wonderful young man. And I just wanted to honor him today, give him a little shout out, let him know that Auntie Sean is thinking about him. Every time I call, Charlene is, in the background. Sean is on the phone because he wants to talk to me and find out what I'm doing and probably just be nosy. But I wish him an amazing birthday. I wish you just blessings upon blessings and your heart to be filled. And of course, I just wish you a long, healthy, and happy life. So that's what I've been celebrating lately is birthdays. And I've been enjoying it actually because mine's is coming up very, very soon as well. So I'm kind of getting in the spirit of the celebration and the time and the feeling that it gives you. I also heard today we're marking the human race has 8 billion people walking among us all over this world on this I call big earth, but it's starting to feel kind of small with all of these people here. And I know, we're worried about the resources, and we're worried about health and wellness, and we're worried about climate change, and all of these things are valid. I mean, how are we going to feed all of these people? We're constantly reproducing, in addition to the fact that we're living a lot longer. We're taking care of ourselves. We're being healthy. And so therefore, 8 billion people, I feel, is going to quadruple quite quickly. So I know a lot of people are worried about, the future with so many people here on this earth. I honestly was more curious and inquisitive about where these people came from. Who are they? Where do they live? More importantly, where did they come from? Like, who created them? Who made them? What is their lineage? What is their genealogy? What is their heritage made of? That is really what's been on my mind all day. Every time I hear the news say 8 billion people are part of the human race now, it's more about who are these people. Lately, I've been concerned about my own heritage. I was impacted greatly by this amazing woman that is learning so much about hers right now. It's made me curious into uncovering where I came from, my mother and her mother, and my great grandparents. I've actually been asking her a lot of questions lately. I know she probably is a little annoyed by it, but I'm curious. I want to know why I am who I am, and how that came to be, my character traits, my stance on life, my ability to see things the way that I do, my ability to even muster through things the way that I do. I'm sure that my heritage is long and strong, and I'm just curious as to find out exactly what it consists of and the type of people that it consists of to make it what it was, the sacrifices that they made. This young lady who is here today is doing that very thing, and she's convinced me to do the same thing. I am passionate beyond belief to uncover everything about my lineage. I want to know more. I remember a time that I didn't want to uncover too much because, people ain't missing. I don't want to know about them. I don't want to find them. But now I'm curious. I'm really, really, really inspired to find out more about where my family, both sides of my family, came from, and the struggles that we went through, but the triumphs that we went through as well. So we want to discuss that today with this amazing young lady named Tamara Lanier. She is fighting this fight in her family, and the title is Reclaim Our History to Reshape Our Future. And we're going to be discussing that with Tamara Lanier, who is a tireless champion for truth and justice, where her advocacy has taken her to many parts of the state, country, and even the world. Lanier is a 27-year veteran of the state of Connecticut Judicial Branch, retiring in 2017 as a chief probation officer. Ms. Lanier has a long and distinguished record of public service and social advocacy. She was appointed by Governor Ned Lamont to the state's first hate crime advisory council. Advisory Council. She was named Woman of the Year by the Connecticut General Assembly's Commission on Afro-American Affairs. She received the Connecticut Commission of Human Rights and Opportunities Leaders and Legends Award and the 2019 Inspirational Women's Award. Ms. Lanier has been a constant voice for change and has traveled the country promoting the need for a national dialogue relative to slavery and its generational harm. She has met with such dignitaries as the Congressman John Lewis of Atlanta and Congressman John Conyers, former Dean of the House of Representatives and Chair of the House Judiciary, to discuss the potential for federal legislation mandating the protection of cultural relics of slavery. With the assistance of the nationally acclaimed civil rights attorney Benjamin L. Crump and Michael Koskoff, Lanier has filed a landmark reparations lawsuit against Harvard University, forcing this nation to reckon with its history of slavery in the United States, asking the courts to consider the question: Who should own the rights to the violence of the past? Here to share her journey to reclaiming her history, please welcome Miss Tamara Lanier. How are you?
I am fine, thank you.
No, thank you so much for being here. I, again, mentioned so inspired by you. So I am grateful that you took the time to share your story with me here on Our Unity.
Well, thank you for having me.
No problem. So first, before we go any deeper, how was your day?
Well, it's been a quiet day. I got a lot of busy work done. Had to catch up on and other things, but it was a quiet day.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad I had one of those days as well, preparing me for this wonderful interview that I'm about to have because there's so much to uncover. Your story is so remarkable. And I just want you to share with the viewers how important it is for us to, to uncover the past where we came from. So I always ask my guests, the first question is, tell us a little about your childhood. Where you were born, how you were raised, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a small community, Norwich, Connecticut, southeastern part of Connecticut. I grew up, we were a military family. My father was a retired military person. He retired from the military after, I think, almost 28 years.
Oh, wow.
And we grew up in a community, Norwich, Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
And what was so unusual about my childhood, I shouldn't call it unusual, but our families, as my mother's story that I often talk about, is growing up surrounded by family and loved ones. My mother and her family, they were probably no more than a block away from each other. So I grew up surrounded by my family and extended family and the friends in the community. We really grew up as one community, one family, and that's fortunate. But I've had a wonderful childhood. I was blessed with a wonderful childhood, loving family and friends, and I actually live about a mile from where I grew up, so I haven't migrated very far from the place where.
Wow, that's amazing. Again, it sounds like close-knit family.
Mhm.
Everyone stuck together. Everyone still lives in the same area. So you're getting together on Sundays, having your Sunday dinners and holidays. I think that's fascinating. So in your household, then, I know that there was many stories shared amongst your family members. Tell me a little about that, the stories that you grew up on.
Well, my mother, she was a retired teacher and principal. She was originally born in a small community called Mount Meigs, Montgomery, Alabama.
Okay.
And my mother, she would often talk about growing up in the Jim Crow South, growing up in the cradle of the civil rights movement, and the things that she witnessed as a child and the experiences that she had growing up in that environment. The one thing that my mom was very clear on, she was sheltered by the ugliness of the Jim Crow South. She didn't actually experience that, but that was because of who her parents and her family was.
Right.
But she was aware of what was going on around her.
Mm.
My mother migrated to Connecticut
Mm-hmm.
in the 1940s, and she took part in a summer work exchange where students from the South would migrate north to work in the hotel industry, the hospitality industry, and some on farms. It was actually the same summer work program that Martin Luther King actually visited Connecticut one summer and took part in the same student exchange program.
Wow.
Yes, my mom, she talked about, again, the uniqueness of her childhood. She was a classmate of
Mm.
Abernathy, one of the late great civil rights leaders who worked very closely with Martin Luther King.
Mm.
She and her brother would talk about the Montgomery bus boycott, and they lived through that. And particularly my mom's brother, who was a carpenter and a plumber, but
Mhm.
he was to walk to work. And so she talked about, again, the history of what she witnessed as a child growing up and how that impacted her life. But most of her stories were about her ancestors, her elders.
Mm.
And she would always start with who she referred to as the Black African Papa Rinty.
Wow.
Um,
Let me ask you, back then, I mean, because I know you know, were a young girl listening to these stories. Were you fascinated by them even then? Did they hold your attention, or did they seem like fairy tales to you back then?
Amazingly, I was captivated. I
Mm.
heard these stories and how my mom was a great storyteller. And I remember the stories as if it were yesterday. And one thing that stood out to me was how important these stories were to her,
Yeah.
and the love and respect that she had for her ancestors and her elders.
Right.
That was something that was very apparent in the way she told the stories. And she talked about her ancestors and her elders with such reverence.
Mm.
Particularly, my mom grew up in a household with people who were born slaves, who had lived many years as enslaved people.
Oh, really?
Mom heard these stories firsthand from formerly enslaved people.
Okay.
And so, you know, when I share these stories, I make a point to mention that I'm not that many generations removed from slavery. My mom grew up in the household with her formerly enslaved ancestors. And they, you know, made it, you know, it was purposeful for them to make sure that the children understood who they were and where they came from.
I
And
love
they tell those stories often. Yes.
I love that. I think it's the fact that she's telling it firsthand, like she was there, she witnessed it. I find that to be amazing, because I think I mentioned I'm just asking my mom, you know, about, you know, my great grandfather and her upbringing and things of that nature, and I'm not getting that connection yet, you know, and I kind of want to dig deeper. But if I think had she lived directly firsthand experiences with it, then I think that the story would have a different meaning, you know, a different weight to it. That is awesome. So your mom had been telling you about this African slave, this Black African from South Carolina for years, I understand. So what made you, or how did you, you know, start the process of finding out who this man was? What made you decide that you needed to uncover your heritage?
Well, it was important for my mom that I write this story down. My mom had a cousin. He lives in New Jersey now, but initially he did our family tree on my mom's maternal side and traced the ancestry back to Africa.
Oh, wow.
It was my mom's goal and her purpose to do the same thing on her paternal side, tracing her paternal legacy back to Africa with Papa Rinty.
Right.
And so she oftentimes, when I was young, she would say, you know, I'm going to put this family tree together. But she never got around to it. And the other thing to keep in mind is access to information and the genealogical work isn't or wasn't as readily available as it is today.
Right.
You didn't have information at your fingertips prior to the internet.
Right.
And so when you wanted to do this kind of research, you had to actually physically go visit the archives to do the work. It's a very different experience than it is today. And so as she got older, she would say, you know, I want to write this down. I want to do the family tree from Papa Rinty to her, and including all the family members. And as my mom's health began to fail, what she then started doing is saying to me that I want you to do this work. I want you to do the family tree. I want you to do the research. And, you know, just to comfort her and to please her, I said, sure, of course we will. We'll do the work.
Right.
And that was just, you know, just trying to comfort her in the moment. As her health continued to fail, it became more and more important to her that I document this, that I write this down. She would say to me, I want you to write this stuff down. And she would give me names and talk about slave transfers and names, and always remember, never forget. And she would say things like, always remember that we're Taylors, not Thompsons. My mom's
What's the meaning of that? Why did she say that?
it was really pivotal because what my mom's birth name was Maddie Pearl Thompson.
Okay.
And she married my dad, who she became Maddie Pearl Thompson Lanier. She was always Maddie Pearl Thompson. And then, yeah. But what my mom's grandfather, who was also Rinty, there are 5 generations of Rinty in my family, he would say to my mom, he would talk about when he was born as an enslaved person and sold, he and his mother, and they were originally Taylors, and then they were sold and became Thompsons. And so in terms of doing the research, that was a very important piece of information, because my mom actually knew the names after the slave trade. And when you're doing the research, and mind you, there's no records of this, you know, when slaves were transferred or sold or probated or gifted, you didn't get a card or a note from your loved one to say, hey, my new name is now Thompson and not Taylor.
Right.
But my mom had the benefit of knowing the names and how they changed. And she would say to me, always remember, we're Taylors, not Thompsons.
Wow.
And I would say, write these things down. And in my mom's last days, it was so pressing for her. She would say to me, write it down. I want you to write these things down. Are you writing this down? And what I actually started doing is recording her talking.
Right.
And yeah, so and it was really, really instrumental in that, because I didn't remember a lot of what she said, but when I went back and played the recording, it had, again, pivotal information that helped me definitively link myself to the man in the image.
Wow.
But that was my mom's dying request for me to write this down and do the research, and I start and unearth all of this amazing stuff.
Oh my God. That's what so how far did you get before your mom passed away? Did she know what you were embarking on, or she had no idea?
She had no idea.
Oh my goodness.
You know, after her passing, and again, when we were promising, we're going to write this down. Okay, Mom, we got this. And we would be writing and taking notes. But again, it was difficult at that time to do the research. But after her passing, I had, you know, dealing with the remorse of just my mom, you know, not being with us any longer. And then that I had promised her that I would do this genealogical work. I said, I have to do this research, but I didn't know how to do it. And I actually got the help of an amazing man. He was a senior citizen who owned a small ice cream shop in my home community. And I was out walking, and I just, you know, struck up a conversation with him when I stopped into a shop to pick up lunch. And, you know, I was just lamenting over the fact that I had promised to do this research and I didn't know the first thing about it. And he said, write down what you know. And he said, I love to do this kind of research. I will take a shot at it. And he did. I wrote down, standing at his counter at his register, we're writing down names. And the one thing that I know helped him in finding the initial documents was that I told this man, his name was Rich. I told Rich that Rinty was an African-born slave. And so I leave his shop. He goes on to do the research, and he discovers the daguerreotypes on the internet.
Wow.
And specifically about Rinty, that Rinty was chosen for this scientific experiment because he was an African-born slave. So he said, yeah, I found your Papa Rinty on the internet.
Yes. Isn't that crazy? How you find a photo of, and mind you, did you have photos within your you did not?
No, I had never, only for my entire life, I had heard stories of this man, but never had an idea.
Actual photo. That is amazing. So when you saw this photo, I mean, what did you feel? I mean, like I would have immediately tried to find my features in this man.
And strangely, one of the things that my daughter said was, you know, based on the stories that grandma had told us, because not only did she tell me, but my children, you know, from the moment that they were old enough to understand, they learned about family history.
Right.
And my mom would tell them the same stories. And my daughter said, based on the stories that grandma would tell, I created an image of Papa Rinty in my mind of this man who was like 10 feet tall. And it's because of the giant like stories my mom told and how she paid homage to him, that my children created an image of a person who was godlike or giant like.
No, I can imagine.
When we saw the image, we just stared and talked about what we saw that were family features, what we saw in his stare, the defiance, the stubbornness, all things that we had recognized from my mom's brothers and other family members. But
wow,
that was so familiar, and we had never seen it before, but we just took just probably more than an hour just sitting, looking, staring, and reflecting. And but
that's
then,
amazing. Let me ask you, once you stared at this picture, and did you start questioning, why is it here? And okay, let's go down that journey. Why is the picture here? Yes, why is your great grandfather's picture on the internet? Take us down that journey.
There were two distinctive moments that evening. We were over the moon giddy about seeing the image and excited. And then all of a sudden, what I had just read hit me about the scientific racism and Harvard's experiment to prove white supremacy, and how these enslaved people were chosen because of their African origins, that they were not Louis Agassiz wanted to ensure that no white blood flowed through their veins, because if there was any white, it made them better blacks or more intelligent or more capable blacks. He wanted a pure African to show the inferiority of the black race. And so I had read, I had read some of this about the eugenics and this ugly scientific racism and the study that Harvard had used to create the daguerreotypes, and that the men were disrobed, their clothes were removed, their body parts measured to show, pointing to like stark differences, saying this is not human. And the women's breast and buttocks were measured, and their facial features, and the point was to show that as Louis Agassiz coined it, we were not of the same blood as them. And so again, the daguerreotypes were taken in the 1850s, and we have to put that in context to what this nation was embroiled with during that time. The country was divided over the question of slavery and emancipation. And so what Harvard was doing was using their academic prowess to put their thumb on the scale to say, here is scientific proof that blacks were not deserving of equal status and equal treatment. And mine also Harvard's influence at the time, as it is today. When you had intellectuals talking, people listened. And people internalized and accepted what they said as factual.
No, you're absolutely right. So you mean to tell me that this scientist from Harvard traveled down to South Carolina to find an African slave? Yes. So that he can prove that Black people were inferior to white folk. Wow. Okay, so these photos are taken obviously without your great grandfather's knowledge of the reason why, what they were going to be used for. Now Harvard has these photos. They're using them in their scientific experiment. I'm sure that their scientific experiment was debunked, and so now these photos are just traveling from, I mean, or just archived? Where did the photos go after they did, did not prove their scientific experiment?
Well, what happened when, again, in context, 1850, the science was debunked from really the door, because the subjects that they used, Rinty and Delia, Rinty's oral history was that Rinty was an educator, that he was a teacher, that he taught himself to read using Noah Webster's Blueback Speller, that he taught others to read using this book. So I know that in the moment they are capturing these images, and that they are the ones that are not in the know, because the subjects that they used actually negated the science in its entirety, but they didn't know that.
Nope.
And I'm certain that Rinty and Delia and the other enslaved people were aware, because they saw them as inferior. Louis Agassiz talked about the Black male as having the intellectual capacity of a 7-month-old fetus in the womb of its mother. So that's what they were expecting, but they were dealing with intelligent, literate educators and educated people.
Yep, unbeknownst to them.
Yes, unbeknownst to them. The daguerreotypes were ultimately put away in Harvard's attic, and later found in 1976.
Okay.
And when Harvard found the daguerreotypes, the woman, her name is Ellie Reichland, who discovered the daguerreotypes, she was shocked at what she saw. Wow. And she actually began to do the research to understand why these daguerreotypes existed and who were the lineal descendants of these people. Wow. One of the things she said was, these people have families somewhere.
Well,
and
we have photos of these daguerreotypes too. I want to show a few photos of Papa Rinty and Delia, his daughter, who actually took the photo with him and was stripped right next to her father. Unbelievable. Yes. So these items were archived at Harvard, correct?
Yeah, they still are.
They still are. Wow. So tell me a little about how you're trying to recover, or once you saw, because I'm sure once you saw these photos, you were very angry and you wanted to get these back. I mean, immediately, especially when you saw they were being used and the narrative was being changed on who these people actually were and where they were from. So tell us a little about that.
Well, when I discovered the daguerreotypes and started doing more of the research and understanding the history of how they came to be and how they were currently being used, I went out to Harvard. And initially, all I wanted them to do was to correct the narrative. Right. They were celebrating and elevating the scientific racist, Louis Agassiz, and they were referring to Rinty as invisible and that we know nothing about this man. And they were actually paying homage to this scientific racism. And so I reached out to Harvard and I said, and they were hosting seminars, international seminars, virtual seminars, writing books and publishing books about these daguerreotypes. And keep in mind that the daguerreotypes are some of the earliest known documented images of enslaved people. And so there is a significant historical value associated with the daguerreotypes. And also, one of the things that I like to point out is I view the image of Rinty and the daguerreotypes of the other Black men as some of the original mugshots, in that these are the first attempts. As soon as America has access to photography, what do? They take a Black man and they create a profile and they racially profile him. So this is, I call it the first act of racial profiling.
I agree.
Images of Black men.
Yeah.
So Harvard was, not only were they promoting the daguerreotypes in a way that marginalized my ancestors and celebrated Louis Agassiz, but they were also trying to create a narrative as to who they were that ran in direct conflict to my oral history, which at this point, when I'm confronting and going to Harvard, I have documents. I have all kinds of proof at this point that I'm a lineal descendant.
And you presented this to them.
When I visited the daguerreotypes, I went to the Peabody to see the daguerreotypes, and I brought a copy of my research that showed a direct lineage, and they just were very dismissive. They didn't want to see. They had an agenda.
Yeah.
You know, they had appropriated Renty's story. They were going to tell it in a way that suited them, regardless of what the facts showed,
and making a profit at the same time.
Yes. And they were, not only were they making a profit, if you wanted to use these images, now, again, there's a great historical value. So movie producers, film producers, people who were publishing books had to write to Harvard and literally beg for access to the daguerreotypes, and they would allow you, if they approved of your content, and also if you paid them a hefty licensing fee. And some people have talked about paying up to $600, $700 for a one-time usage fee of the image.
Wow.
Yes.
And mind you, not caring about the name, the story behind it. This is just a anonymous Black man, slave from slavery time, and we're using this for our story.
Yes.
Unbelievable. Well, let me tell you. Go ahead.
There was one artist, her name is Carrie Mae Weems, who visited the daguerreotype. She saw the image and she was so shocked at what she saw in the story. She came back to New York and she hosted an exhibit.
Wow.
And Harvard threatened to sue her for hosting that exhibit because she did not get their permission to do that. And so actually she challenged Harvard. She said, you know what, I don't believe, the way she framed it is, she again raises the issue of appropriation and cultural appropriation, and us having our own voices to tell our own stories.
Right.
And she said, she welcomed them. She said, sue me. Let's have this conversation in court.
Yes.
But actually backed down and ultimately purchased her images. And so that, again, just to extend its ownership over the daguerreotypes, they purchased her images.
Wow. So when did you decide that you had to move forward in pursuing, this court case with Harvard? I know you reached out to them last year. They did not get back to you at all. I remember sometime, I think it was March sometime, that, Harvard put out a statement that they're, giving back money to the Black community and investing in the culture. And so I thought that was a good thing. But then in June, I hear you I'm at work, but I hear you in the back of me on my TV. I hear someone, actually a newscaster, reporting that a landmark case had just been won by a young woman who is suing Harvard. So real quick, because our time is winding down and I want your whole story, I want you to take me from them not contacting you to, I need to now move forward. How did you reach out to Crump, the lawyer? The attorney?
Yes. So at a certain point, it was actually in 2017 when Harvard was hosting another one of these international conferences where they set up and they say, they again marginalize Renty and are, all about agri-Cis. And my daughter and I left that conference feeling that they are just stringing us along. And I knew that I needed to get advice from an attorney. At some point later, I'm attending a workshop that Ben Crump was hosting. I think it was either with Al Sharpton. I believe it was Al Sharpton's conference. But Ben was the keynote. And when I'm taking a selfie with him, I approach him. And as we're fumbling with the camera, I'm talking real quickly, trying to convince him that this was a case worthy of his attention. And somehow I did. And so, but ultimately, we brought an action against Harvard, and our legal case was very, very clear. The law is very clear. Firstly, this is plundered property.
Right.
When Harvard commissioned the daguerreotypes, they did so illegally because the state of Massachusetts had abolished slavery and had given former enslaved the same property rights and other rights and protections as white men enjoyed.
Right.
And so Harvard also, the daguerreotypes were taken without consent, without, how do I frame this? The daguerreotypes were, Rinty and Delia were forced to disrobe and take these images.
Thank you. Without permission.
Without
No
permission.
Mm-hmm.
And so the crime was committed. It's no different than someone kidnapping a person and forcing them to take their clothes off and taking pictures as a trophy or souvenir of this bad act.
Right.
And so what our argument is, Rinty and Delia, as victims of this crime, have an interest in their body, first of all, but also a property interest in what was taken from them, their image.
Right.
And Harvard's argument was, irregardless of how illegal or unethical or abhorrent the taking of the images, the photo always belongs to the photographer.
Right. Possession.
Yes.
Right.
And
Okay.
so the judge agreed with Harvard and dismissed our case. We appealed to the Massachusetts Supreme Court. And so the judgment, and you can find it online, is a stinging indictment of Harvard. The oral arguments were, the judges were very clear that if you take a photo or acquire a photo in the commission of the crime, that's either a crime or a tort, and that as a tortfeasor,
Right.
you don't get the property.
Right.
You have to give it back. And so, but in the oral arguments, the oral arguments were very different from the judgment that they ultimately wrote in June.
Okay.
In June, they condemned Harvard for their treatment of Rinty and Delia and my family.
Wow.
They also said, they gave us the opportunity to enlarge our complaint, to go back and sue for extreme, outrageous, reckless, and negligent infliction of emotional distress for Rinty and Delia's enslavement and for the wrongdoing of my family.
Right.
So the decision is historic in that never in the history of this country has a reparations case made it past the front door. They've all been dismissed for lack of standing because it's very difficult to prove that you're a lineal descendant of an enslaved person. And not only that, but an enslaved person who has property.
That's amazing. How did that make you feel? I mean, you not only being an advocate, but you being a family member, you being a descendant of this man and winning this case. And I feel not just for your family, but so many other families to come. What was your emotions in that moment?
It was mixed for me because what the court also did was they left the daguerreotypes in Harvard's possession.
Yeah.
Which I'm still stuck on. And so, as long as I have breath in my body, I will fight and advocate for those daguerreotypes to be in a place that gives dignity, respect, and restores Rinty and Delia's humanity.
Yes,
right. And that can happen to Peabody Museum because of the ugliness and how they were created.
No, you're right. Let me ask you, what do you ultimately, want from Harvard? I mean, I know it's going to be a hard-fought case to have these photos returned to you, but how would you like them to use them moving forward? I know you mentioned dignity and respect of who they are, but how would you like the narrative to move forward?
I believe that the only thing that Harvard can do that would satisfy me is to surrender the daguerreotypes to our family, or that the daguerreotypes are transferred to a museum such as the Smithsonian or the Afro-American Museum in DC.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And his truth be told behind. Thank you. And his truth be told behind that. And this case, this landmark case about it as well. So it can open up so many other doors of people who want to uncover who they are and where they came from. Because I really think it's so important. Your story, it was so empowering to me because so many of us, we feel oppressed about, our slavery and our heritage and where we came from. I'm honestly the type of person, I don't want to relive that all the time and remember where we came from. But at the same time, if I knew the strength in some of my ancestors and what they went through and actually had to endure, I think I would feel a lot stronger within myself and my truth and who I am. You know what I mean? And I
Or
think that would help so many others, huh?
yeah, understanding where you get your strength to do what you're doing right now.
Thank you.
Carry their DNA. So there is someone in your lineage who you are modeling after. And you just have to dig and do the research to understand who you are.
Yes.
And why you are.
Yes.
And that's in your family tree.
That's what you've done for me. I'm going to tell you, we got a few photos. I know that you went to visit the slave owners of Paparenti. I need you to tell me, how did you find that in your heart to do? And what kind of strength did it take for you to do it?
Well, and I haven't talked a lot about the genealogical research because it was intense and it was countless hours, nights. But I was blessed with an opportunity to encounter a woman. Her name is Rose Shriver, and she's from Columbia, South Carolina. She's a godsend because in doing the research, I looked because I knew, because I had the probate wills, that I had to find my ancestors by finding the people who enslaved them, that my family traveled along with the Taylor family who enslaved them and were dispersed all over the South.
Right.
So I was looking for people who knew the history of the slaveholders family, so that I can understand where to start looking for mine. No real luck, but I encountered Rose. She was involved in a Facebook group. I think it's the Lower County, South Carolina genealogy group. I probably mispronouncing the name, but she was incredible. She helped me find very important documents, but she also helped me find the great-great-grandson of Benjamin Franklin Taylor, the slaveholder.
Wow.
His number and gave it to me. And I was crazy enough to call, not knowing what to expect on the other end, if someone's going to pick up the phone and curse me out or what.
Wow.
But I called him, I talked to him. He was 98 years old. And he invited me to come to Columbia, South Carolina for the weekend. And I remember when I hung up the phone, I said to my girls, we're going to Columbia, South Carolina to spend the weekend with the family who enslaved our family. And they said, you're crazy. They wanted no part of that. But I connected with Rose and I went, and it was a memorable experience. I am glad I went. I learned so much. Actually, Dr. Edmund Taylor, very, very, he was like the keeper of his family story, like my mom was the keeper of her family story.
Right.
And he had done a lot of research and had written some manuscripts with the University of South Carolina about the Taylor family, which was a prominent, wealthy slaveholding family.
Okay.
And one of the things that, he shared with me often, he kept saying, is that the Taylors treated their enslaved people with dignity and respect. He was trying to convince me that his family, they were good slaveholders.
Right.
And so,
how I think I would have an issue with trying to process that. How did you process that?
Yes. And so, one of the things that I did share is that slavery and dignity should never be in the same sentence. But we had a conversation where I was trying to convince him about, because, we were talking about the creation of the daguerreotypes and how they came to be, and the political motivation that I felt was associated with it to promote slavery. But right. Dr. Taylor, in the history of their family, the daguerreotypes were taken because it represented the humanity of slavery and that they were good slaveholders.
Right. Okay.
And so I said, don't you kind of see the politics that were at play here? There was a bigger purpose than showing that you were great slaveholders. But one of the things he said is that their family traveled to South promoting Christianity and establishing churches. And it was the law. They just
Yeah, that's all they did.
Yeah.
I totally get it. They just upheld the law. Well, I'm going to tell you something. I know that journey had to be, you know, very emotional. But I know that it was also educational for you and also inspiring, I'm sure.
Yes. Yes.
Um, I know that you learned from what, you know, you and I discussed that they mentioned that the furniture that you were actually sitting down at, you know, was designed and created by their carpenter. And from what you understand, Papa Renti was actually a carpenter for the slave owners down
It was actually renting in the probate will, which
right.
by the time when I'm visiting with him, I had memorized the document. I knew it like the back of my hand. And we're sitting there, and he said, "We're eating from the dishes that belonged to Benjamin Franklin Taylor, and we're sitting at the table and chair that was hand carved by his um, enslaved carpenter."
Mm,
I knew from the probate will that my ancestor was the family carpenter. So I had a whole moment because I'm thinking, my enslaved ancestor carved these tables and chairs, and the craftsmanship and the detail of the woodwork, I
mm,
was floored by. And the fact that they're still, I
yeah.
can sit in them and.
And
And,
they still look beautiful,
yeah.
actually. That is amazing. And I don't know how I would have felt to believe that I'm actually sitting, you know, in a chair or touching the chair or a piece of furniture that my great grandfather designed. I mean, what was that feeling in that moment? I'm sure it was pride and
Yeah.
also a little sadness as well, right?
It was another moment like when I described when I first saw the image of Renty, it was like time had stopped because he continued talking. And to be honest, I could not tell you what he was saying because I was lost in that moment
Right.
of my ancestor carved this table. My ancestor carved this chair, hand carved. And then I'm thinking about, him, my enslaved ancestor, would minute or very limited resources creating something so amazing. And
Yes.
and then I thought about the value that meant to me and
Yeah.
probably very little value to the Dr. Edmund Taylor and his family, but
It meant the world to you.
yes.
I could
Yeah.
imagine. Well, listen, I know you mentioned the probate will, and I want to show that real quick before I get to the Dare to Be You and have to say goodbye because we have minutes left. But I remember you telling me about this will, and you actually sent me a copy of it, and I
Mhm.
read it. And when I tell you, Miss Lanier, I cried like a baby.
Mhm.
I cried like a baby to see in this will them naming your family members and
Mhm.
them saying that everything they own, including themselves and their children and their increase,
Mhm.
belongs to this slave owner who he's bequeathing to whoever in his family.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then to see a list of your family members and the amount of money that
Mhm.
they cost. It was devastating for me to see, but I will tell you, it impacted me so greatly because now it made me so I'm so inspired. I'm going to uncover my lineage. It made me connect to my heritage even deeper in that moment because now those names on that paper were no longer your family, they were my family.
Yes.
And I needed to figure out a little deeper understanding of who I am and where I come from. And that piece, those two pieces of paper that you showed me made me realize that it is ever more important that I do it now and also share that desire with my daughter. And
Yeah.
I just want you to tell me, because I know now you're moving forward in the case. I know, right now, you're still waiting for the legalities to kind of work out. But for the most part, you guys are moving forward. This is a case that's going to be taken on. And tell me what's new now and next for you.
Great. Before I move to that, I just want to say in doing the research and going through those probate wills, it's not for the faint of heart because what you see in your family groupings
Mm-hmm.
is the mixture of livestock, like pigs,
Yes.
and cows. So you're going down your family line here, and then there's some cows and pigs.
Yes.
And it's just so sad because you think about how devalued we were as a
Yes.
people.
Yeah.
That's the kind of consideration we get.
Yeah.
But in terms of my case, about a month or so ago, the attorneys filed the amended complaint. So it is now pending in the Massachusetts. We've gone back to the lower Supreme Court. I mean, the lower Middlesex Judicial Court. And the case will be heard there. And what is so historic is, like I said, no reparations case has ever survived the dismissal. We're going to have our day in court. Renty and Delia on the docket, demanding justice, demanding redress.
Yes.
And that their property be given proper consideration. So that will happen.
Yes, it will. We are going to free Papa Renty. We are going to free Papa Renty, and we're going to make Harvard, especially Harvard, do right by your family, and that's all you hoped for. Oh my God, I thank you so much, Miss Lanier, for being here. There's so much more I wanted to dig into, but we do only have an hour show of actually 56 minutes. But I want to thank you so much for being here, and please continue your fight, continue your journey. Don't give up. Please share with us in 10 seconds or less what you would hope the next generation does.
All I say is it's important to know who you are and whose you are. And if I had not done this research, if I had not started looking in our family tree, we would not be here having this discussion today. So the value of going back and doing the genealogical research and understanding who you are will enrich your life in ways that I can't explain. But it's a necessary labor of love, and I encourage everybody to do it.
Thank you. I agree. Thank you so much for being here. Again, I wish you just blessings in your journey and uncovering the truth about your family and their lineage. And I know your mom is so proud of you right now as well, Miss Lanier. So I want to get right quick to the Dare to Be You and the Dare. And it is, we are the chosen. In each family, there is one who seems called to find the ancestors, to put flesh on their bones and make them live again, to tell the family story and to tell that somehow they know and approve. Doing genealogy is not a cold gathering of facts, but instead breathing life into all who have gone before. We are the storytellers of the tribe. And that is exactly what Miss Lanier is, the storyteller of her tribe. She is fighting right now for Papa Renty to be free. That's all we want, is for him to be free. And every one of us as well. We want our minds to be free of the strongholds that our past has on us. Let's find out the greatness in our lineage and the strength in our lineage. And let's empower our future generation with that information. Share everything you know about your family so that we can have a newer generation of young kids out there who are proud to be who they are and want to share that with their kids as well. So I want to thank you, Miss Lanier, so much for being here. You're a powerful woman, my friend. You really are. So God bless you in all that you do. And I want to thank everyone else for tuning in to another episode of Our Unity. Please remember that peace and love is in the palm of our hand. So let's go out there and be some love and give some love and share some love. Thank you so much, Miss Lanier, again. We will have you back, my friend, before you get too busy, okay? But keep us updated on everything that you have going on. I love you guys. I want you to have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next week on Our Unity. Say good night, Miss Lanier.
Strong Island Entertainment.